So I'm gonna go over, this is kind of how I do this in class, is I tend to go over your text every week. I know, ideally you read it at home and then we go over it. And I highlight some of the important things that I want you to understand, because sometimes you read over it and you're like, okay, I get it. But then I go into explanation and it makes much more sense, okay? So there's several things that I want you to understand about public speaking. And this chapter 1, is called Speech and Higher Education, okay? And here's the fact that speech in higher education is something that we practice in America. American higher education is built on public speaking. No way you're going to go through the system of higher education in America without some sort of a public speaking at some point. So you're not going to get away from it. And the reason is history. It's where we come from. Western civilization comes from the Greeks and the Romans, and they valued speaking very, very much. And that's why orality and giving speeches is a big deal in a Western society. And most universities in America are going to stress that, because that's their historical heritage. That's the culture, that's where we come from. In some cultures, people do not value speaking that much. Yeah, it's important, but it's not a big deal. They don't judge you by the way whether you can speak publicly or not. But in other cultures, they judge you whether you can speak publicly or not. People will look at the person and say, oh, he's not a very good public speaker, and they immediately will judge them bad, loser, whatever. It's harsh, but that's how it is. So it doesn't work like that in the whole world, but it works like that in the Western world. And that's why orality in the American university system is a pretty big deal. Now, every one of you knows something about public speaking because you have been speaking your entire life, and you've been making speeches without even you realizing it. Sometimes you play with kids in the playground and you make a speech, right? Because they got on your nerves and you just told them what you thought. You didn't think about it as a speech, but you did. And so all of us essentially make speeches when we talk to our friends. We tell them about the new movie we saw or book we read or something. We all make speeches of different types. Sometimes we just don't realize it, and for us it's not like a formal process. But so what we do is in public speaking classes, we study the process of speech making, the art of it, the construction, the building blocks essentially. And there's several things that you have to understand that what we do in a public speaking classroom. Now, first of all, classroom that we're in is like a lab. It's a place for us to experiment. I want you to experiment with different types of speech that maybe you have never experimented with before. It's a perfect place to practice and get some feedback. And when you practice, then you will take advantage of your skills. You will learn from other people just as much as you will do it from doing it yourself, because you'll see somebody else making a speech and you're gonna say, wow, that's really cool, I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna learn how to do what they just did. And that's how we learn. But when you're intentional about it, you actually make a note and you say, okay, I'm gonna copy that. I'm gonna copy this idea. I'm gonna copy this behavior. I'm gonna copy this method that they use, okay? And it improves as you practice. Now, there's something that I want you to zero in on pretty early on, and this will actually help you with your entire education. And that is critical listening. How many of you are familiar with the concept of critical listening? Have you heard of critical listening before? Have any idea what that means? Critical listening. Critical.
Is it something like critical view? Like something like journalism thing?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Journalists listen critically. They should. If they don't, they shouldn't be journalists. But that doesn't mean criticizing. That doesn't mean I have to find everything that's wrong with you. It just means that you have to analyze what is being said. You have to judge it. You kind of have to evaluate it. Criticism doesn't mean you're wrong. Criticism just means I get you. I have gone through your points. I see where you're coming from. I understand. That's what we mean by critical listening. People who are critical listeners tend to be the ones who do not get caught in some stupid scam, or don't go for a phony salesman who's trying to sell them something that they shouldn't be buying, because they hear through their stuff and they say, that doesn't make sense. That what you say sounds good, but it's not believable. And here's why. Because I know this is not how that works. I know this is not how this works. Now, if you don't evaluate what other people say and just take their words at their worth, you may be believing anything they just said, right? That's not critical listening. That's just listening. A critical listener comes up and scrutinizes the message, essentially, to their benefit. You know, they're gonna ask questions about it. So that's an important skill that you will learn in class, because not everything that's said in class is important. Some things are more important, other things are less important, and by practicing your critical listening skill, you basically become better because you zero in on what's really important. And actually listening and learning how to listen, listening is a skill. If you want to learn how to give speeches, you actually have to learn how to listen to speeches first. Because again, you learn by sometimes emulating other people and picking up things from them as well. And we will be listening to each other's speeches, so we will be learning from each other little by little. Now, I told you that public speaking is a big deal in the Greco-Roman world. And the authors of this textbook did actually put a very interesting quote here by a philosopher from the 4th century BCE, Greek philosopher Socrates. He said this: "The power to speak well is taken as the surest index of sound understanding, and discourse, which is true, lawful, and just, is the outward image of good and faithful soul." Now, so that's like a mouthful, what he said. I mean, you got to think through this. What he says is the power to speak well is taken as the surest index of a sound understanding. So if you speak well, that means you understand well. Okay? And then he continues, and discourse, which is true. So if you speak well, then most means what you're going to say is going to be true. Why? Because you get things, you understand things. And then he says, lawful and just, an outward image of good and faithful soul. So that he basically, what he says is people who speak well and speak in an educated, eloquent way are trustworthy. I want to believe them because they can communicate so well what they want to say. This is that idea that comes to us from the Greeks. Greeks spent massive amount of time learning how to give speeches. They went to school, and from the youngest age, they studied what we call the oratory skill, how to be a good public speaker. Because when you grow up, you become a senator or a banker or a lawyer or a tradesman of some sort, you're going to have to use your speech skills to get yourself ahead. And so kind of they valued it as a big deal. And that's part of the reason why it kind of transferred into the Western society this way. Now, what is the study of human speech? When we study public speaking, we're essentially studying human speech. Human speech is, not perfect, but it is the study of eloquent expression of the human spirit. That's what they say. When we speak the way we feel, so whatever our inner parts tell us is what we let come out, essentially, in speech. So if you want to understand who a person is, you need to hear them speak. And the more they speak, the more you'll understand who they really are, because their inside, their very spirit, their very soul actually comes out in them speaking. Hopefully they're being truthful, right? And so what is important, a concept that I want you to be familiar with and understand and kind of tuck away in the back of your head is this word orality. Orality. The word orality has to do with oral, okay, speech, mouth, lips. So orality has to do with speech that is spoken rather than written, right? And it also has to do with a speech that is live rather than pre-recorded out there somewhere. And so orality in our public life has a very special place. I don't know if you realize this or not, but people like things live. Why, when you watch news, you have that little tiny thing blinking that says live? What does that mean? What does it matter if it's live or not?
For cut the attention about.
And you're like, yeah, it's your attention. You're like, hey, I want to watch this. This is happening now. So for us, something that's happening right at this moment is actually important because we're living in that moment as well. So that's what part of this orality does. A live speech is very different from a pre-recorded speech. Okay? There's a whole reason why people give speeches that are live. I mean, a president gets up on TV and gives a speech. And he doesn't give a pre-recorded speech. He could have said, here's a YouTube I sent you guys watch it, I'll see you later. And he walks out of the room. He gives live speech, and everybody listens, right? There's something that happens in that audience, that's something that happens in that room. There's something special about that real live speech. Have you ever thought about it? Why do people give live speeches? Why can't the president just upload it to YouTube and says, you guys watch it when you have time? They put it on broadcast television. They stop whatever show they're showing and say, okay, we're gonna show the president speaking now. Or whoever it is important that's speaking. They do these live speeches all the time. Think about it. You know, why do they do that? Have you thought about it? What's special about a live speech versus a non-live?
Well, I just, maybe live is just like, you cannot edit anything.
Okay,
And
so it makes it more real.
yes, maybe like, I think so, like no editing.
Yeah.
I think it's like, I like the same of the old phraser, say expressions, say more the words. So I think so because these will make lives. I think it's this way. I follow this way. So
That's good. So in live speech, you're not just listening to the words, you're also watching for the expressions. You're also sensing the feeling that's in the room. A lot of times you're also, if you're part of the audience, you're sensing what the feeling is in the audience is. You may not get that in the pre-recorded speech. You may not get that. So any other thoughts of what's so special about live speeches? It's the human connection. It's because when we're live and we're talking to each other face to face, that face-to-face interaction is a human connection. When you're looking at the screen or you're reading something, it's not the same. It's not the same. Being in the same room at the same moment, hearing, feeling, just all of your senses engaged. There's something special about it. There's an emotion that exists between you and the speaker that you cannot truly 100% capture on any other source of media, which is why people give live speeches, because you cannot recapture that in any other way. So that's really the gist of it, okay? So there are several things that the authors observe in a textbook that I kind of wanted to point your attention to. It's on page 6. He talks about, well, actually she, Kathleen German, is talking about characteristics of orality. Which is characteristics of orality. Remember, we talked about orality is that speech that's live, that's real, that's there, you know, verbal speech, right? So what are the characteristics of orality? This is what they know. Number one, speech tends to be integrative. Integrative. What does that mean, integrative? Okay, yeah, put it together. So essentially what happens is, when I speak live, you become a part of my speech. And I become a part of your listening. You and I essentially integrate in some way. That's what makes that speech special, live speech, versus a video that you're watching. You don't feel that same connection. So it's integrated, that's one thing. They also assemble groups of people together. When somebody gives a speech, it's not just two people, right? It's usually a group listening and one person speaking. And so that group also feels being a part of something much bigger than they would be by themselves as an individual. So it brings people together for a common purpose. When you speak in a political rally, people come together for a political cause, right? Or some other reason, or they protest something perhaps, you know? They come together for a reason. They're upset about something and they want to let them be heard. And so something draws them together. So there's that feeling, that emotion in there. And that's important. So that's what we mean by integrative. Speeches bring people together in some way, shape, or form. Now, speeches tend to be redundant. What does the word redundant mean?
something to construct, help you, something like
Yeah, yes.
that? Help you?
Repetitive, how about that?
Yeah.
Repetitive is another way of saying redundant. Now, you will notice that in my teaching method, I'm redundant. I'm repetitive. Why? That's actually part of my teaching technique. Because if I repeat it multiple times, most likely, it will get into your head and it will stay there. Hearing something multiple times helps your memory. So I would be redundant, I would be repetitive, I would say things over and over. And I don't even notice this, but sometimes my wife gets on my case. I will talk to her and she's like, "Oh, talk to me like you're part of your students. Don't talk to me like you're lecturing." I got it the first time, but she'll get mad at me, you know, but I can't help it. When you're a teacher, you tend to repeat yourself. So there you go. I'll repeat myself many times with you. Don't take it personally. It's just a part of our oral experience, our orality. Now, speeches tend to be concrete. They notice Speeches tend to be concrete. What do I mean by concrete?
Foundation, have foundation, something you need, like something like can be like put on top and you can understand.
Touch and feel.
Construction, yeah.
They're real. They're real. Speeches talk about things that are real. What do I mean by that? Let me translate a little bit further. They talk about places and events. They talk about people. So if I speak about, let's say, let me bring in another point. Speeches tend to be also situational, concrete and situational. And I'm going to link these two things together. When I'm speaking to you right now about this moment. And I could say, when you come see me next week in this class, and I point right here. See, because you're in this class, and I'm talking about this class, and I'm pointing, you know exactly what I'm talking to. When you're watching the video, you don't really know what I'm pointing to, right? Because you're not really there. See, situational. If something is happening outside, right? If another school shooting just happened, and I happen to start talking about it, it's on your mind, right? It's on my mind. That's what I want to talk about because I'm upset about it. It's situational. It's concrete. It's real. You see, a video that you're watching that was done 5 years ago may not connect with what's happening with your life right now, right this moment, right this second, or right this day, or right in this spot, right in this room. You know, you may be feeling cold over there, right? And I'm going to start talking about feeling cold. And all of a sudden, you're in. Why? Because that's how you feel. I am addressing what is actually happening to you versus a person listening to me pre-recorded. They're feeling warm and cozy sitting on the couch, bundled up in a blanket, you know? They don't have the same feeling. So this is what we mean when speeches are concrete and they're situational. They address you right where you are. Oops, that happens. We probably all get it in a second. It's Amber Alert. But do you see what I mean? That's what makes speech special. Because you cannot recapture that in any other way except live. And that's the nature of orality. That's why people like to give live speeches. That's why people like to listen to live speeches, because that relationship exists that doesn't exist in other places. Now, let's see. Public speaking and public communication is also, just to kind of recap. We talked about integrative, redundant, concrete, and situational. These are kind of the big things that I want you to keep in mind. And hopefully, me having explained it, you get what that means, okay? And what that does to a speech, these components, these characteristics of a speech, they make it dynamic. Dynamic is something that's what? Ever-changing, right? Speech is ever-changing. It actually never stands still. An ancient Greek philosopher, I remember, I believe it was Socrates, who said, you never step foot into the same river twice. Think about it. You go into a river and you stick your foot in, right? And it's that river. But if you take your foot out and you put your foot back in, it's a different river because it changed. Something flew down the stream a little bit further, it's a different river. You never step into the same river twice. It's different every time. And that's what speech is. Dynamic. That's orality. You know, fixed media, it's fixed. It's the same every single time. You lose that. We lose that. So that's what's special about it. Now,